Hello, Audrey.
Hey, David. Good to see you.
Good to see you on the other side of the planet there. And we're going to do a new series that we're going to kind of pop into from time to time, in which you and I share articles, blog posts, podcast episodes, just resources in general that connect to our growing understanding of the world of international education, because that's what we're all about. So we're
You
going to
betcha.
start this new series. And we're going to include some going global stories that might connect to those resources. So, do you have a going global story for us?
Yeah, so it's not a specific story, just the idea that when you look at transitions are a challenge. And you and I have both done a lot of them, more than some other folks may have done. And yet there are still challenges each and every time. There are things you can do to ease transitions, and one of my resources touches on that. And so when I get to the information about safe passage, then I'm going to get into more about what that's about. We're also going to do an upcoming show on transitions, so keep your ears peeled for that.
Well, let's keep going with transitions because one of my resources is about orientation. And it's that time of the year that folks are getting back into schools. And this brings up memories of my last school, which did an outstanding job with their orientation. And one of the big things they did was they gave teachers time to set up their new classroom. So sometimes there's a complaint. You've arrived, you're excited, you're doing some orientation activities, but you're going, when do I get into my classroom? I'm a little worried. I want to get set up. So this last school I worked at, they did a really good job with that. And then one of the neat things that they did, and I'm going to go over a list of them in just a second, was we did the normal going out to restaurants. We, in fact, went to an open air restaurant, took a little boat to it, which was kind of cool. And then we went out another night to share drinks and stories. So that was fun. But the big takeaway from the orientation was that in my division, it continued for several months. So what we would do each month is come together and we would review upcoming events and procedures. And that was very, very helpful. So that's my going global story. And putting this all together, what is our guiding question?
I love that the school chose to have the orientation ongoing. I think that's
Yes.
really nice because, you're not done with learning about the school for quite a few months and the country and so on. So it sounds like that was really well done. So the guiding question for our episode is, what are we learning about international education? Why don't you take it away with your first resource?
Yes, and mine is from the International School Community blog. And if you're not a member of the International School Community website, do go to our resource page and find the link and sign up because it's just so helpful. It's a community of international educators all over the world sharing what's happening at their schools. And they do post a lot of helpful information to their blog. And the one that I found very pertinent and it's connecting to transitions and, of course, orientation is entitled New Teacher Orientation is Now Underway 14 Must Haves. So let me just run through just a couple of them because I found this list spot on. I'm going, yep, we did that at a school. We did that. So here are a few. One of the things that you can look forward to with a well-run orientation is to get that trip around the city, just showing you where things are, public transportation, but getting a feel for it and just the excitement of being in a new place. One of the things that you'll remember from Saudi is hopefully you'll get a pickup from the airport. And in Saudi, that was a huge thing because everyone would come out and be waiting for you. And that was just such a wonderful feeling of warmth and welcome getting off the plane. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah, it was really nice. We had our principal and our sponsor couple met us. I can't remember if the head of school met us, but he might have also been there. And yeah, it's really nice.
Yeah, it definitely makes a difference. I have to smile at one of my schools because one of the things here is giving you some money in local currency up front. I remember being very jet lagged, getting off the plane, getting on the van, and my principal handing me this packet of money. And I was just going, wait a minute, this is great, but I'm not sure what I'm going to do right now with this money. So just be
Yeah.
ready if that happens. But that was an eye opener, and I was trying to stick it all in my pocket. It was a big wad of money. Hopefully, your school's way ahead of time are working with onboarding to help you find a place to live. And so that when you land, you work with a real estate agent and you go out and you take a look. So that's a big one too. Let me just name a couple more here. A resource person with a contact number and email, that's more of an onboarding. But you often meet people with HR and say, this person's going to help you with this person's going to help you with that. So that's my first resource. Audrey, what do you have for us?
Hey, that's not the article that Ron told us about during his interview, is it? Was that written by him? Because I remember him saying that he was on the train and one of his colleagues said, yeah, I'm going to be in charge of onboarding. And I read this really cool article. Is that the one?
It might be in, maybe they repost it every year so that
Right.
it's the date is August 17th of this year. But I
Uh-huh.
wonder if this is the one that Ron put together. I was going to mention Ron. We did interview with Ron, who's the head. He put together the ISC. So take a listen to that podcast if you can.
If you dare.
Yeah.
So, my first resource that I want to highlight is from ALOC, the Association of International Educators and Leaders of Color. And they have a research page where they've linked some articles in that are really helpful and eye opening in terms of DEIJ, of learning more about how we can do a better job of including people and a little bit about what racism can look like, what otherism can look like, and how to move away from that. And then they have a really helpful infographic too about the international school ecosystem has a recruitment problem. And when you really look at it, this is a part of the international school recruiting that it is improving and can still stand for more improvement. So I just think it's interesting to see the articles that they've highlighted on there. So recommend this resource. What do you got next?
You keep teeing me up perfectly. We didn't plan this on the whole idea of recruiting and trying to expand recruiting for the right reasons. And what often will bring about change is when there's a strong need, like you're not getting enough teachers coming to recruiting fairs and such. So I'm going to get to that part of it in just a second. So I was reading in the Wall Street Journal, which is mainly focused on finance. And when the Wall Street Journal starts talking about education, that means something's really going on that, in my mind, it's made it to the mainstream press. So they wrote an article entitled, Teachers Are Burning Out on the Job. Student behavior and mediocre pay are taking their toll. So in the big picture, this is focused on the US, and I'm going to talk about one that's more European focused in just a second, but it's going to get at international schools in their recruiting as well. So let me read this opening paragraph because it's very powerful. And I think for so many educators out there, almost wherever you are, the baby boomer teachers are retiring. I'm an example of it. So are you, Audrey. We're at the tail end of that group. So here is the first paragraph. Students are showing up to school in much of the country this week. Their teachers are already demoralized and exhausted. Student behavior problems, cell phones in schools, anemic pay, and artificial intelligence powered cheating are taking their toll on America's roughly 3.8 million teachers on top of the bruising pandemic years. And then leaning into the next paragraph, in surveys and interviews, teachers are most often pointing to a startling rise in students' mental health challenges and misbehaviors as the biggest drivers of burnout. So, of course, they're going to try to grab your attention in their opening paragraph. But I've seen other articles that are very similar to this one. And I've been following articles on my generation of teachers who are really retiring. They're in their 60s. And then the question comes up, what's hiring looking like? Are they getting enough young people coming into the pre-service programs, or whatever the term we're using for schools of education preparing teachers? So that is my second resource. And a couple themes that we're getting at is low pay, mental health challenges for students, and the cell phones in the classroom. And we've spoken about these topics a little bit. And then in the picture of the international schools, like I'm saying, is maybe this pool of teachers around the world is getting smaller. And I'm going to talk about Europe in just a second. So let me throw this one back to you for your next resource.
Well, it's interesting, the cell phones in the classroom. I've kind of gone back and forth on that because I know at a certain time, the tech gurus were saying you've got to work with it instead of fighting it because they're here to stay. And how can you leverage the fact that each kid has a device in their hand in order to make your lessons more engaging? And it's up to you. And then there's the whole, but kids are on their phone all the time to excess, and a lot of what they're consuming is negative, and that is exacerbating the mental health issues that you were speaking about. So, it kind of, there's two sides to the coin. And I think more and more we're seeing the downside of them having 24/7 access to the whole gamut of information. My next resource is the Global Online Academy. We heard this from Michael Nachbar when we interviewed him, that they are constantly keeping their blog up to date. It's called Insights, and they have items posted on there that really get you thinking. For example, they have been talking about competency-based grading and engagement scores and your educator presence. They ask for input, which is great. So if anyone has ideas, they're open to hearing them. They're a very collaborative group, as we heard from Michael. And I just think it's a wonderful resource. And then they also have a resource that I was diving into recently, which is their summer playlist and their 2024 summer playlist. What I love about it is they've got different modalities, so you can choose. They've got books listed on there that really look great. They've got just a quick description of each one. They've got podcast episodes highlighted on there. And I was listening to one from Brene Brown, and it was fantastic. And she was talking with a researcher named Lisa Cahey, who wrote a book called Immunity to Change. One of the descriptors that they give is everybody wants transformation, but nobody's willing to change, which just really kind of describes what is often going on. And then there's also Hidden Brain on there, which I've listened to before. Really great. 10% Better. I've also listened to quite a bit. Really looking forward to diving more into some of the podcasts that are on there that I had not seen before. What do you got next, David?
Well, I'm going to build on that a little bit. The idea of change, which in transitions are such a theme, and we're speaking about them today. And then when we speak about the process of change in schools and just how difficult it is, which connects to a podcast recording that we did with Justin Hardman, who runs a professional development company out of Hong Kong. And we talked a lot about that. So that's going to be another podcast to look at in our growing list of podcasts, because that is such a theme in international schools. All right. Well, I'm going to come back and just stick with dealing with the struggles for teachers in schools. And I'm going to very much go more international with this one. So this is The Economist, which is a publication. It's funny, they call it a newspaper, but it's a magazine. And it focuses on international relations and world politics and such and world news. But they also did a big article about what's happening in the field of education. And they start off in Estonia, talking about math scores and how much the students there are ahead of Britain and a couple years ahead of Americans. And just on the surface, it looks like they're doing really, really well. But they quote 1 in 3 of their new teachers leave the profession within 3 years, and they really are struggling to bring in new teachers into the profession. And then they go on to point out in Britain are also missing their hiring numbers for the past decade, just trying to get new teachers in to replace the ones who are retiring. And then in Germany, Many of the elementary schools, because they're shorthanded, are reducing time spent on some subjects. So my takeaway from both of these articles is, wow, this is scary. We knew it was happening, but when you throw in the pandemic and how much that has led to mental health struggles, loss of learning, and then when you throw in the cell phones, and I'm always talking about Jonathan Haidt and his work on cell phone usage and how it's affecting young people and us as adults, I guess, as well, it gets me to a couple big takeaways that if these big mainstream news providers are offering this information, the problems must be pretty profound. So
Yeah.
it leads me to a couple of questions, and I don't have the answers, but here are my questions. So, really, what is the future of K 12 education with staff shortages and increasingly difficult teaching environments? And hopefully, I'm sure policymakers and governments around the world and school districts are looking at that. And then my second question, how does the possibility of fewer teachers entering the profession come into play with the growing number of international schools? And you and I have been curious about that one. Is the number of international schools keep growing? On one hand, we're going, wow, that's going to mean they're going to probably throw their recruiting nets further, not just focus on certain countries that they've tapped into previously. And that's a great thing. And this is connecting back to bringing in more people that bring in diversity and varying backgrounds. So that's positive. But if the overall pool of new educators is getting smaller and smaller, that's going to be a problem. But then on the other side of this, I guess I have a third question of, are more of these international schools going to try to tap into teacher preparation programs to hire young educators right out of university as a way to maybe even have them skip that jumping into public schools for a couple years, which is what everyone advises. And then from the student perspective, the teacher student coming out of undergraduate work or graduate work, maybe they are hearing so many stories about going into the public schools that they're going, yeah, I really want to jump overseas. So that's one of my takeaways.
Yeah, so we have been wondering about that for a while, where are they going to get more teachers from? And this is one of the reasons we're keen to get the word out about international education. We're thinking if you're burning out back home, it's possible that going into an international school will help to alleviate some of the causes of that burnout. These schools are generally a level above what you would get in your home country. And you tend to get educators that are more committed. You get parents who are more committed. You get school boards that are, more selective in the issues that they look at and more involved. So you really do get just better quality of the job as a teacher. And you get to focus on what you love best more than you might back in your home country. So just a little plug for why we're doing what we do. So my last resource I want to point out is Safe Passage, and that's Doug Oda's work, and he does counseling with folks in the Netherlands, and he also does consulting with schools, and a lot of it's based around it's called SPAN, or Safe Passage Across Networks, and his book, Safe Passage. The idea being, let's focus on transition. Like I said in my Going Global story, transition can be challenging. There are things that can be done to help alleviate this. The onboarding that you were talking about, David, is helpful for teachers to really feel like they're part of a community, like they're starting to feel more comfortable in their new environment. Important to give them time to get their classroom set up because it is hard to concentrate on new PD if you're getting set up. There's also the whole transition of families. There's the whole transition of students, and all these things need to be considered. And that's largely what Doug's work focuses on, is helping schools to acknowledge the importance of prioritizing, facilitating the transition of new teachers, new students, new families into their community. And it's wonderful work. And we are really hoping that Doug might be willing to come on our show. So we are going to be reaching out. If anyone listening knows Doug or can put in a good word for us, we would very much appreciate it. So that's something we would like to look at some more. And there are people who can partner with you during this transition time. And I am one of them. I am working on being a transition coach. So please reach out to me. You can go ahead and write me at educatorsgoingglobal@gmail.com just to get the ball rolling on the idea of perhaps working with a transition coach. Just thought I'd throw in a little self plug there.
Yes, it's exciting. You described the SPAN program in Doug's book very well. A few years ago, I was fortunate to attend one of his workshops and I read his book. So you did, for our listeners, that's a great start, but definitely go out, get his book, go to his website. And I can share in a very personal way. I've got another Mac story. He, like I think I've said in a couple of the podcasts, he's working overseas and he's going through the transition right now, the emotional social transition. And he's very much in the very positive. Things are great. I'm working with these wonderful teachers, PD, orientation. It's all wonderful. And I'm reminding him that his social network, he lived in a home back in Virginia with several of his buddies, and he'd walk out of his bedroom and there was his social network right there. So he's very aware and paying attention to, he no longer has that network right in front of him. He can use technology, and he's, I think, going to be very prepared to go through this transition process. And it's that self-awareness that I think is the first step, just stopping and saying, I need to take kind of my social, my emotional reading right now on how I'm feeling, how I'm interacting with others, what I'm missing, but on the very positive side, what's exciting and how am I going to build new friendships and a new support network face-to-face, that is. So thanks for bringing up that resource. And yes, I hope we get Doug on our show at some point. So
David, we got to get that Max guy on our show too. It sounds like he has a really interesting going global and transition story. What do you think?
I think that's a definite, and we're going to make that happen because he really has had a very eventful process of recruiting. And like I said on one of our other shows, he's at a British school, so it's a very different curriculum for him. So I think that's going to be interesting for our audience. So thanks for bringing that up. So Audrey, this has been fun, and I think we can do this again from time to time. So why don't you take us out with a nice wrap up for this show?
Yeah, well, honestly, we're very pleased with the resources that we've been able to curate so far. And we really do want to get some listener engagement. So we'd love to hear from you about any interesting blog posts, articles, podcast episodes, and so on that have expanded your thinking about international education. So please email us at educatorsgoingglobal@gmail.com with your suggested resource. Or if you're a member of our Facebook group, which if you're not, why aren't you? Please add your resource into the group. Thanks again, everybody, for listening. Hi, everyone. It's Audrey.
And David.
We're so happy and grateful that you're here listening to us. We really want to thank the people who follow us on Apple Podcasts and have written reviews. We appreciate you guys.
We hope to increase our reach within the international education community, so we are asking for your help. Please follow our show on Apple, Spotify, YouTube Music, or your favorite podcast listening app. We have posted instructions on how to do this on our podcast page.
If you like our show and the services we aim to provide, please rate us and write a review. This will help us grow our audience and support our mission of sharing the joys of international teaching with as broad a group as possible. We'd love to increase those numbers in Africa, South America, and Australia.
So thanks again for listening and for all your support. Let's recruit as many teaching peeps as possible to travel,
teach,
and connect with us.